Live from Delray Beach, Florida, it's Thursday night. And I'm here. I'm Rabbi Aviva Bass from Temple Sinai of Palm Beach County, and I'm so happy to be here with you. This is the first of a series called The Torah of Our Lives, and the reason why I decided to do this series is because I really believe that every person has the ability to teach Torah just from what they've been through in their lives. There is so much we can learn from one another. And some people believe that actually there are many reasons why we encounter certain people in our lives and to learn the lessons that we can learn from them. As a rabbi, I've been very blessed to learn many of these lessons as I have done pastoral counseling and gotten to know people during various life cycle events or private meetings. But often I get to cherish those memories and those lessons, but they are not readily available to the rest of the congregation. So I started this series in hopes that we can all learn from one another the Torah that each of us has deep inside ourselves, or maybe not so deep, from our own experiences. The first guest in this series, I am so proud to introduce because he is fabulous, Robert, known as Bob Altabet, and I'm going to tell you a little about him before he reveals himself. Many of you already know him, but to those who don't. Bob is a consultant in market research, business development, and sales forecasting with emphasis on his experience in the battery industry. Bob was previously with Duracell Batteries as the Vice President of Business Management for 28 years. His educational background is in economics and math, and he's received awards for advertising work, has published in the Journal of Business Forecasting, and has one chapter in the Practical Guide to Business Forecasting, a college-level textbook on sales forecasting, and he has taught strategic planning. You wouldn't necessarily know all of that about Bob because Bob is so knowledgeable on so many different subjects, and he's such a pleasure to talk with at our Torah study and other occasions, and he always has very bright, insightful things to add to our discussions. He's also going to be our guest speaker for Temple Sinai, virtually again, on Sunday, and he'll tell you a little bit about that Sunday program of adult education. But for now, I'd like to introduce Bob Altabet.
Hi, folks.
Hi, Bob. It's so good to see you. Okay, so I want to begin right away because we have very little time. I don't want to keep people on Zoom or YouTube for too long because they tend to get tired after a while, but there's so much that we could talk about. First, I'd like to see literally what Torah or text that you can teach to all of us. What piece of the liturgy most speaks to you and why?
The piece that speaks to me is the verse from Ashrei, Poteach et yadecha umatzvia lechol chai ratzon. You open your hand and satisfy the desire of every living thing. That's just a reminder to me that God is ever there. And even when things seem tough, he's going to be there as my help.
Wonderful. And I just want to note that if you have a Mishkan Tefillah, the Reform Prayer Book at home, you can find these very verses of the Ashrei in the Shabbat morning service. And I will tell you what page that is. That starts on page 215. And the Pei verse, which is the one that Bob just referred to, is on page 216. This is an alphabetic acrostic in Hebrew. So every verse is Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, like A, B, C, D. So the verse that Bob picked was Pei, P sound, like P, Poteach et yadecha, and that's on page 216, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stanzas down in the Hebrew. So you said every living thing, and really what strikes many people the most when they get to know you even a little bit is your love of nature, and in particular, a very small and often, too often, overlooked piece of nature. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what you do for beekeeping, because I happen to know that you are a beekeeper. And I'm going to share my screen in just a moment with some pictures of you, but why don't you go ahead and tell people a little bit about what you do and why you chose to do this profession, or not profession, but avocation.
I have always been interested in anything connected with the world of nature. A lot of that coming from my summer camp experience at a Jewish camp starting many, many years ago, with which I am still involved now on the board. For the beekeeping, I got involved about 10 years ago when my daughter and son-in-law took a course in beekeeping, and they decided to put beehives on the roof of their apartment building in Brooklyn. And we were doing that, and I was enjoying it, thinking about whether to do it myself. And then their landlord decided he did not like that idea. And I got this call: "Dad, can the bees move up to Yorktown?" And that was it. I got hooked. I was fascinated with the bees as pollinators. A little bit of a statistic for everybody, but they are not a native species to the Americas. They were brought here, but they contribute more to agricultural productivity than all the fertilizers and insecticides combined.
Wow.
And I find that fascinating. The taste of the honey will vary depending on the season, because they will be pollinating different flowers. Whatever nectar they get is actually what gets turned to honey, and they go through this process of dehydrating it to the right context. And then I also got fascinated with their connection with the world of mathematics. The bees create these combs with these perfect hexagonal squares or hexagons, and that's fascinating because it turns out to be the most efficient construction they could have done, and they can communicate in vector algebra. We won't go into vector algebra too much right now, but basically when they are communicating where to forage to their fellow bees, they do a little dance, and you can watch some other YouTube videos and actually learn to interpret their dancing. And they will tell the other bees how far away from the hive it is and what the directional angle is from the sun. And that's what vector algebra does.
Wow, that's very interesting. I've been trying to pull up some pictures that you had sent me, some photographs, but I don't think that they are showing. I'm going to try one more time here. Okay, can you see a picture of bees on here? I'm going to ask in a little chat.
Yes.
Oh, good, fantastic.
You got one, you need to go through a few others.
Yes, okay, I'm hoping that we can, but you know, often we see bees just like this in our yards or somewhere, wherever we happen to be. And usually our reaction is fear. And so I wanted you to tell us why you aren't afraid as a beekeeper and why we should perhaps not be as afraid as we are.
Bees get a bad rap because they are blamed for all of the stings, because they're the most commonly known stinging insect. In fact, the stinging insects that are usually the culprits are wasps, which we can find around here if you go walking in the nature preserve, so be careful. Hornets and yellowjacks. And because the yellowjacks in particular look so much like bees, the bees get blamed for everything. The bees, in fact, never will bother you unless they think you are threatening the hive. That means that if I stand behind the hive when I open it up, I don't even need to wear my bee suit. They won't touch me. If I were to go in front of it, I'd better be wearing it because then they will worry about defending their hive. We
Right.
work with kids at camp. Our hives are right next to the farm, and therefore the bees are always doing their pollination there. And the farmer is always pointing out to the kids that the bees that are doing pollinating aren't trying to defend anything. They're just going about their job, and they will not hurt the kids.
I don't know if you can see this picture. I have very small on the screen, a picture on my screen of you with several of the kids. I don't know if that's visible.
That's not the one showing up. You've got one where I have a few bees, so you got to move to another picture. I'm not sure what software you have, but you should be able to hopefully scroll back and forth or pick another one.
Yeah, I just did. Let's see if I can do this again. I'll stop sharing and then reshare. Let's see if that works. And I have that one. Okay, and putting that down. Okay, now are you seeing the picture of you with a couple of kids holding a beehive?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, good. Fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about where you are and why this place that you're actually doing this has such a strong connection for you with your Jewish journey.
Yeah, this is Surprise Lake Camp. It's about 60 miles north of New York City in the Hudson Valley. And it happens to be the oldest Jewish camp in the United States, founded in 1902. And I started going there as a kid at about 8 years old on scholarship because there was no way my parents could have afforded it. And that began to give me some real intensive exposures to Jewish things in ways that I didn't always get at home. And I had not yet begun going to Hebrew school. So it provided that education in a fun way that got me hooked, got me much more excited about what I would learn when I finally did get to Hebrew school a year later. And it has left me, because of things like the way we observe Shabbat, etc., with both this love of Judaism and this love of everything nature. As a side note, for anybody that likes to hike, it is the most intensive hiking trail area in the entire country.
Wow, right there on Surprise Lake Camp?
Yeah, well, immediately borders Hudson Highlands Park, and it is a destination site for people that like to hike from every place in the country.
That's great. And I don't know if you mentioned it yet. Did you mention that you are now on the board of this camp?
I am on the board, and I'm a vice president, and I've been doing that for, I don't know, probably about 10 years now.
Wonderful. That really is wonderful. Such a wonderful way to connect you to your roots and to help others to form that connection. And it's wonderful that you go there and that you actually interact with the campers. That's wonderful. It's like going back to camp. I've done that a little bit with Camp Coleman in Georgia. And when I've gone there, it's been a lot of fun. It's almost like, you know, I'm a camper too. So even though I'm on faculty.
One of my favorite comments from kids is most of them like all sorts of other things, hiking, baseball, you name it. But I was delighted when a handful of kids said that the beekeeping sessions were their favorite part of camp.
So why bees? How does a bee connect in any way to Jewish tradition or to Judaism for you?
The world of nature and environment is very important, as you will probably explain to us at some point in the next few weeks with Tu B'Shvat coming up.
Absolutely.
But in particular, the word for bee, as I always start early with the kids, is the name Devorah. Mm-hmm. And that the root of that is Devar, as in Aseret Devarim. So at least for me, there's that, which is the 10 Commandments. For me, there's always that connection. I feel connected with the world of Judaism because of the bees. We do gather honey and we use it with the kids for Rosh Hashanah programs. And most beekeepers have a practice of keeping about 1/3 of the honey and leaving 2/3 for the bees so that they can survive through the winter. I decided, because of my study of business ethics, to make it just 20%, which is what the Talmud says is a fair profit, and anything more than that is not a fair profit.
Wonderful. So you mentioned Jewish law, Jewish ethics in halakha and the Talmud. What role does halakha play in your life?
Halakha is something important to me. It's a connection with our history and our civilization, particularly the parts that are related to the way we relate to people and business and ethics are things that I really try to actually live by. And for the things that are simply ritual, I try to follow a fair amount, but absolutely, I'm not Shomer Shabbat. I will ride on Shabbat.
There's no judgment here.
Yeah, and
Whatever
I
your
like.
choices are your choices.
Yeah, and well, and that's part of what's nice about the Reform movement is it says we can make those choices, and so I do as much as I feel comfortable with. But it's definitely a guide for me in the world of ethics.
Okay, we got a question actually. I don't have the chat function open for YouTube. So my husband just handed me a question. Carol Anderson asks, where are your bees and how do they survive the cold? Because you're from up north, you're a snowbird, and you keep bees in your hives. You have 2 hives, right?
I have actually 5 hives.
Oh, wow.
In my backyard, and
Mhm.
them are up at camp so I can work with the kids. And bees up north and down south are a little bit different. They need to get acclimated to surviving through winters in a cold environment, but they can do that. And during the summer, those hives will be anywhere from 25,000 to 60,000 bees, depending on how I've set up the hive. But as the winter approaches, they go through their honey reserves and they start whittling their numbers down. The queen stops laying as many eggs and they drop down to somewhere around 3,000 bees. And those bees cluster around each other and spend the winter buzzing. And their objective is to keep the queen warm and to keep the bees on the inside warm. And they keep rotating which bees are on the inside and which ones are on the outside. And with that, they keep, even in the depths of the winter, they keep the temperature inside that hive at about 70 degrees. I'm going to verify that starting next year because I just got a line on thermometers and video things that I can put inside the hive to keep.
Oh, wow. Right.
And, in theory, potentially even watch them from down here on the internet, but we'll see how that works.
Wow, I wonder if it's like with a dog, if you talk to them, they'll know that you're there.
Actually, it's interesting that you say that. I don't know if the bees do recognize the beekeepers. And
Really?
the other interesting article I just saw, someone just did experiments with flowers and found that the flowers can listen to the bees. And the flowers, when they hear the buzzing of the bees, alter the sugar content of the nectar to beef it up to make the bees happier. And that lasts, as they hear the buzzing, for about 6 to 10 minutes. So they communicate in some way that we have yet. And that was a study I just read 2 weeks ago.
That's phenomenal. Wow, that's so interesting. And all of what you were talking about so much connects to that pasuk, that verse that you related to in Ashrei, because all of these communications between different creatures, the way that the creatures create things, in particular mathematical design, I just think is really very interesting, and perhaps some of the greatest arguments for the existence of God or at least a force, however you want to define that created everything.
Yeah, one of the pictures I sent you was an experiment I did last year with one hive. Normally we do these rigid rectangular frames because it is very, very efficient and you can take the honey out efficiently. And there's a whole history behind that I will not go into. But I gave the bees the chance to make free-form decisions on exactly what their hive should look like.
Wow.
That was the picture that showed me this honeycomb and all of these strange swirling patterns that I had never seen before. I posted it on the internet, and a friend of mine actually sent me another link to an artist that specializes in doing artwork using those patterns.
Let me see if I can get this particular thing up here on our sharing screen. Here, share screen, and here it is. Let's see. Okay, is it showing now?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Wonderful. So that's really neat. Very, very neat. It's like their own math and art in one. Really
Yes.
cool. Yeah. Okay. So you spoke about halakha a little bit and about your consulting with the Talmud. And of course, both Reform and Reconstructionist Judaism emphasize learning and education, but not often do lay people necessarily have those abilities to consult with those texts or the inclination. And it turns out, as we spoke, I found out a little bit about your background Jewishly that I find very interesting. Why don't you tell everybody about your Jewish background and your family's background and how you came to your Judaism other than the camp?
My family background is from Turkey, various parts of it, and that's basically where what are called Eastern Sephardic Jews come from, sometimes called Judeo-Spanish Jews. And as it happens, that's where my wife's family is from on her mother's side. And I attended Sephardic synagogues growing up. My Hebrew school was actually Talmud Torah, was an Ashkenazi school because that was the one that was on the way to and from public school, so it was logistically convenient. So I got an interesting background from that as well, but I learned all of the melodies, etc. And then my grandmother, my grandfather had died when I was about 8, and both of them did. And my grandmother remarried a few years later. That's another interesting story someday, but she actually married a childhood sweetheart that her family forbade her to marry. And they got together when I was about 12 or 13. Both of their respective spouses had died. And that man, a step-grandfather, Marco, was a mentor to me in the world of Jewish learning. And he taught me Bible and the parts of the Talmud that he liked. He didn't go after the stuff that was hard. It was the things that were fun. I guess his favorite line is one from the Jerusalem Talmud that anyone who has not taken advantage of every legitimate pleasure available will be called to account in the world to come.
Right. I love that, because most people think of you'll be called to account for your negative deeds, but for those things that you may also be called to account for those. Don't get me wrong, but you are called to account, it says, for those pleasures that were permissible, but you did not allow yourself to partake in. So I love that. Getting back just for a moment to your pleasure of teaching the kids at camp about the bees, I had a question from Jay Sweet of our congregation. Are the kids reluctant to go near the beehives? Are any of them, do any of them sit out or How do they
The
react?
younger they are, the more comfortable they are experimenting with anything. As they get older, the boys will not admit that they're afraid. And some of the girls are, but if they see their peers getting close to the hives, they'll give it a try.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's good. Well, it's great. I saw them. It's almost like PPE. It looks like everyone is ready for going out and confronting.
They were masked.
Right.
The hardest part of doing any session is getting the counselors to help me get them suited up to be safe.
Mm-hmm. Maybe you should have some of those suits available now when you go out to the grocery store or wherever you're going. That's funny. Okay, so hopefully soon, actually, we'll all be vaccinated and it'll be fine, I hope, God willing. But getting back to your background, you have this wonderful Sephardic background. And what I know about Sephardim and Sephardic background is what we've heard of as Judeo-Spanish, also called Ladino. And the way that I know Ladino is because I sang several of these art songs, these love songs, in concerts. I'll give you a little snippet, like the Yomenamari Dunaire. Yomenamari Dunaire, la 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 la, and has this wonderful, all these la-las and classic guitar behind it. Love all those love songs, but I had thought, I know now erroneously, and you're going to tell us why, I had thought that Ladino was basically a dead language except for in these songs and, you know, maybe kept in some old books, but is it actually spoken today?
It is still spoken, not by enough people, so that it is considered, there's a whole classification of languages, and it's what would be on the endangered list. Has had a fascinating revival during COVID, because there clearly have been lots and lots of people that wanted to brush up on their Ladino, learn Ladino, reconnect with their roots. And there weren't enough close-knit Sephardic communities with the world of all this Zoom education and several Sephardic groups that have put out Zoom programs. There have been hundreds upon hundreds of people in the last several months taking Ladino lessons. I did several of those programs. I'm actually teaching a beginner's program now with the Sephardi Federation of Palm Beach County. I'm not enough of an expert, but I was good enough in Zoom to be able to help manage and facilitate.
I'm sure.
And I'm doing now a conversational program so that I can feel more comfortable about fluently conversing.
Right. You're learning in a conversational program.
Yeah. So
the beginner.
Whether that's enough to save the language, I don't know. But it creates a different environment where the critical mass is not only people that live near each other, but people that can communicate with a computer. So we will see. All of my grandchildren certainly know songs for holidays and Passover, etc. So, so far we've made that step, and we'll see where it goes. In fact, in my son's school, my grandson's school, besides English classes, they're also doing things to learn Hebrew and Spanish.
And you did mention to me about relatives of yours, like that step-grandfather, was it? Or who spoke?
Yeah, my step-grandfather, who I mentioned, he taught me, and we mentioned his comment on Talmud. He taught me a lot about Bible. And
did he speak to you in Ladino?
A little bit. If I had asked, he would have. I wasn't thinking about that then. But when I saw the way they wrote, they wrote in this old-fashioned Hebrew cursive script, and he taught me to read and understand that, and to read and understand the Rashi script, which is based on this Soletreo cursive script.
Yes, I found that fascinating because in rabbinical school, I learned to read what we called Rashi script, and it's used for Rashi, but also for other commentators as well in the Talmud. And I found out that it's not just from Rashi, it's actually derived from this Ladino script. That's fascinating to me, really fascinating. And I thought that you had mentioned that one of your...
Yeah, it's called Rashi script.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I was going to say, I thought that you were, you had a grandparent who only spoke to you in Ladino when you were a child. Was that?
Yes, my father's mother never really learned English well. And to the day she died, when I was probably already 25, 26, she spoke in Ladino. I can understand most of what she said. I always responded in English. And I could do a little bit of that with Marcia's mother, because Marcia's mother was fluent in Ladino. And I regret that I didn't ask her to work with me on this.
Yeah, Marcia is Bob's wife, for those who don't know her. Yeah. So, and her mother, her parents were from Turkey, correct?
Right.
Her mother was, okay. Wonderful. Well, I never knew that people, even just a couple of generations ago, were speaking Ladino. Like in Ashkenazi families, grandparents often spoke to their grandkids in Yiddish and they would answer in English. So it's very similar. So I'm sure that some of the conversation, it comes back to you, and it's a way to keep your grandparents' legacy alive and to keep the culture alive. We have a Yiddish book center that's wonderful in Amherst. So maybe we can find one, someone will found one for.
Actually, we have.
Oh, you do?
The folks at the Yiddish Book Center about 3 years ago started collecting Ladino books.
Ah.
And also about the same time, Devin R. at the University of Washington began assembling a Ladino library, which is now the largest Ladino library in the world. And for those of us in Florida, and I have not gotten the chance to visit, but right near here is, I think it's called Florida Atlantic University. They apparently have an extraordinarily large Ladino collection.
Well, they have a very large Judaic collection. I didn't know that there was a lot of Ladino in it, but that's great. That's wonderful. I'm so glad that it's being preserved, but also revived. And that's wonderful that you're part of that revival. That must feel great to you to hear people speaking it.
Yes.
So how, with your Sephardic and mostly Orthodox background, and also when you were a kid, even though you were Sephardic, you learned in a Talmud Torah that was Ashkenazi Orthodox and got all of this background. How, with that background, did you end up at our synagogue, a Reform synagogue, Temple Sinai? You there, Bob? Did you hear me? Are you frozen, Bob? I think we may have lost you.
Okay, a few things.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah, I'm still here, and you're kind of fading in and out. So,
okay.
But I think I've got. Yeah, I don't feel. You look frozen to me, and I'm not. Can you hear me now?
Yep, I can hear you fine.
Yes. No.
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Okay. Marcia has never been as religiously oriented as me. She's certainly spiritual, believes in God, but ritual has just never grabbed her, and a whole bunch of history because she didn't get any of that growing up. And that's another interesting story for another day. We had experimented when we got to Florida. I tried some Orthodox synagogues. I tried some conservative synagogues. And one day it was late and we were thinking we wanted to go to Friday night services, and Temple Sinai was the closest place available. So we said, why not? and we tried it. And at Temple Sinai, I met the most welcoming group of people at a synagogue that I have ever met in my life. And I chatted with somebody there, a member, who talked to me about your Shabbat morning Torah study. And I tried that the next day. And I was hooked.
And we are so glad that you and Marcia came to
You
us.
seem frozen on my screen. Okay, we there?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, so we're so glad that you and Marcia did decide to stop by that Friday night and to meet us. So that's great. That's wonderful. We're so glad you're part of our congregation. So you're going to be teaching on Sunday, and many people know that you're teaching, but not what you're teaching about or who you're teaching about. They may have seen the name, but they may have no connection to who this woman was. So can you tell us a little bit about what you'll be speaking about in that adult ed? This is on Sunday at 3 p.m. and there is room for more participants. So you can see the Temple Sinai website and call Temple Sinai or email to the adult education if you would like to be a part of that. So, so Bob, tell us a little bit about what you'll be teaching.
Great. I first heard about Penina Moise when I did the tour at Temple Bet Elohim in Charleston. I had actually read the book that had a lot of their history a few months before that because it had come recommended by the American Sephardi Federation. And it included their influence on the reform movement. And when I did the tour, as it happened, the person doing the tour was the wife of the person who'd written the book. And one of the exhibits that they had was about Penina Moise, and that she was a Jewish poet. We're talking about late 1700s into the early 1800s, which is when she lived. And she lasted up through just after the Civil War. And she was the first Jewish poet in the United States, not just the first woman Jewish poet, but the first Jewish poet in the United States. She published all sorts of interesting liturgical work. She was responsible for the hymns that went into Bet Elohim's hymnal, which was considered the first Reform hymnal, even before the Reform movement officially published anything. And when the Reform movement did start publishing their Union prayer book, they continued to include lots of her stuff. As late as the 1930s, the Union hymnal still had 13 of her hymns. And she's no longer found in the hymnals. And she was also responsible for all sorts of secular poetry of all kinds. She's written some interesting things about California wine. She never left Charleston, so I'm not sure when and how she got that back in the 1800s.
Right.
I found her fascinating, and she was considered one of the most popular Jewish poets for roughly about 100 years after her death. And she has since been supplanted by others. And I fell in love with her poetry. She apparently wrote music to go with lots of it, but I'm going to have to make a trip to the university in Charleston to find that, because most of the things that I can find published is music other people have set her words to.
Oh, I see. I would love to hear her compositions. So that would be very interesting if you come across them, if you're able to travel.
Yeah, I've inquired. The only way I can do it is to go to that library and visit. So
well, hopefully, God willing, after the pandemic, you'll be able to do that, and Maybe you'll write your own book, who knows? But that was really neat. What interested me about the story when you told me about it is that she was actually a member of and very active in that particular congregation that you visited, that synagogue is one of the oldest in the United States, and that she was actually a member there is pretty amazing. Do you know if the building itself is still much the original structure, or has it been rebuilt?
It's not the original structure, but it is the structure that she was alive for the dedication of. And some of her hymns were used at the dedication. And that dedication is generally tagged as the first performance of a Jewish choir in a Reform synagogue anyplace. And so she has the distinction of having had her pieces performed by a choir.
Wow, that's wonderful. So they should definitely, I would think that they would have some of her music somewhere in their
They
archive.
didn't. They told me where to go to get it, and they gave the references, but they could do more. And at some point, I have connections with, I spoke to some descendants of hers who would be delighted to help if I make the trip down there, but that's as far as I can get. So for now.
Okay. Is there anything else that you wanted to tell our viewers or to plug for Sunday's program?
Only that for the moment, I'm planning on reading most of the poetry. But if I have any volunteers, if this is going to be Zoom rather than YouTube Live, that want to read, send me a note or get in touch with me, and we can give you a few things to read.
That's fantastic. That's great. I'm assuming in English, not in Hebrew, Yiddish.
All in English. Everything. She was apparently very knowledgeable in Hebrew, but thing she did was English because what precipitated their move to reform was not enough people knowing Hebrew, and she was instrumental in doing translations of lots of things for them, and in providing these hymns in English for people to use.
Great, great. Okay, so for more about Penina Moyes and her life and her poetry, and to hear Bob speak more, I just love hearing all of his stories. Please join us on Sunday at 3 p.m. on the virtual live seminar that we will have, the Adult Education, which is sponsored by the Jerome Ira Solkoff Memorial Adult Education Fund. And it should be a fun part of our Sundays at Sinai series. So again, if you have not registered, there is room for that course. And please do contact the Adult Education co-VPs, and you can find their emails in the chat. Their email addresses are in the chat so that you can join. That's Jane Brown and Estelle Morgenstein. So either of them will be able to help you out with that. And I want to make a plug for this series. This is the first of what I hope to be a long-lived series of interviews with various congregants. So I'm plugging both the watching of it, which I hope you will do. The next time that we have one scheduled is February the 18th. So we're going to be doing this monthly. I don't know if it's going to be exactly the same Thursday of the month, but we will be doing that monthly. And the next time is February the 18th, and we will advertise that. In terms of being an interviewee, being a guest on this show, please contact me if you are interested. Rabbi Aviva B, as in boy, at gmail.com is the best address to reach me, Rabbi Aviva B at gmail.com. And anyone wishing to reach Bob, his email address is Robert at Altabet, and that's ALTABET.US, United States. Okay, so Robert at altabet.us. And I hope to see you all next time. Before we completely end our time together, though, I would like to invite Bob to sing us something in Ladino, something that he may have learned as a child or that is even still sung today.
Definitely still sung, definitely learned as a child. And if you see this in various other places, you will see slightly different versions. This is exactly the way my family did this, so it's got some minor variations. But I picked this to sing as a Passover song. It's Who Knows One done in Ladino. And it's easy to follow the translation because I didn't want people that don't know any Spanish or Ladino to have trouble. But I just give you the way it begins. It's quien supiensi entendiense, who knows and understands. And then alabar al Dios criense, praised be, exalted God. And then we go through qualo es el uno, one, same thing for dos. And then you'll probably follow most of the answers. I'll go through until Rabbi Aviva raises her hand and said, I've done too much. We skip to 13, or we could just cut it off because it could go on forever.
Yeah, I'm going to mute myself so you don't hear any background noise. We'll just hear Bob. Okay.
Quien supiensi entendiense, alabar al Dios criense, qualo es el uno, qualo es el uno. Uno es el criador, uno es el criador, uno es el criador, Baruch Baruch Shemo. Quien supiensi entendiense, alabar al Dios criense, ¿cuáles son los dos? ¿Cuáles son los dos? Dos Moshe y Aarón, uno es el criador, uno es el criador, Baruch Baruch Shemo. Quien supiensi entendiense, alabar al Dios criense, ¿cuáles son los tres? ¿Cuáles son los tres? Tres nuestros padres son Abraham, Isaac y Jacob, dos Moshe y Aarón, uno es el criador, uno es el criador, Baruch Baruch Shemo. Quien supiensi entendiense, alabar al Dios criense, ¿cuáles son los cuatro? ¿Cuáles son los cuatro? Cuatro madres de Israel, Sara, Rivka, Lea, Rachel. Tres nuestros padres son Abraham, Isaac y Jacob. Dos Moshe y Aarón. Uno es el criador. Uno es el criador. Baruch Baruch Shemo. Quien supiensi entendiense, alabar al Dios criense, ¿cuáles son los cinco? ¿Cuáles son los cinco? 5 libros de la ley, 4 madres de Israel, Sara, Rivka, Lea, Rachel. 3 nuestros padres son Abraham, Isaac y Jacob. 2 Moshe y Aarón. Uno es el criador. Uno es el criador. Baruch Baruch Shemo.
Can you skip now to the last one and go all the way back? That would be great to hear.
Yeah, we can do that. So, quien supiensi entendiense, alabar al Dios criense, ¿cuáles son los 13? 13, ¿cuáles son los 13? 13 años de campos minyan, 2 tribus de Israel, 11 estrellas de sueño de Yosef, 10 mandamientos de la ley, mesas de la preñata, 8 días de Brit Milá, 7 días de la semana, 6 cedras de la Mishnah, 5 libros de la ley, 4 madres de Israel, Sara, Rivka, Lea, Rachel, tres nuestros padres son Abraham, Isaac y Jacob, dos Moshe y Aarón, uno es el Criador, Baruch Hu, Baruch Shemo.
Wonderful, fabulous. I'm so glad that you came and that you really showed us so much of yourself and how the Torah of your life can inform ours. And I'm hoping that that we can keep this up and learn more and more from you in time to come. And the next time that we will meet, I'm going to say again, the next time the Torah of Our Lives will have another guest, will be on February the 18th. February 18th will be the next time we have a Torah of Our Lives. So that will be a Thursday evening as well. Thank you so much, Bob, for your speaking, your sharing of personal information that is so important for us to learn, and also for your singing and bringing this culture alive for us tonight. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time on the Torah of Our Lives. Please join us tomorrow night for Shabbat. Bye-bye. Take care.